No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
On this episode, I want to talk about something that we've mentioned on a few podcasts before, but we haven't really had a full episode on it in at least a year or two, if ever. And this is the concept of leadership as a skill that you can practice and get better at. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I saw a message on LinkedIn where somebody posted kind of like a posing a question to the audience kind of thing of, are there born leaders? Are there natural born leaders? And there, if you ask 10 people this question, are there born leaders or is leadership a skill? You'll probably get 10 different answers. I don't know that it's as cut and dry as being able to answer that question yes or no, that either you have it or you don't, or it doesn't matter, you can teach it to anybody, or it's not something to be taught, you have to be born with it. There's a lot of gray in there. And so what I want to talk about today is this concept of what does it take to be able to learn leadership, and what do you do to learn leadership if it's even possible?
No, I absolutely believe it is possible. I think that there are a lot of things that, from a leadership theory standpoint that you can, consume, whether it's a book or a podcast or a video or ideas of how to effectively lead people. On personal experience, I can tell you, I think that I learned it really, 2 ways. The first was watching other really great leaders do what they did and kind of emulating that, copying it, seeing how they engage with people, how they talk to people, how they connect with people, how they made me feel in the way that they would interact, and then doing the same thing with people as I led them. And then honestly, the second way that I learned was making mistakes, making calls, making decisions, realizing it was the wrong one, either in the moment because it didn't impact the person the way that I wanted to, or later on as I reflected back on what the decision was and maybe considered whether or not it was the right decision in the time. So I am more from that side of things where I absolutely believe that becoming a better leader is building on a skill and taking into account either mentorship or leadership content, and then being able to apply it. Not that it will always go the right way, but I strongly believe that it's a skill that you can get better with over time.
Yeah, I like that you said, and being able to apply it, because I know a lot of people who could write amazing leadership books. They could give seminars and teach leadership, and not just leadership, but in all areas of this, in human resources, sales training, pretty much anything. There is a segment of the population that is articulate enough to convince you that the way to do these things is their way of doing things. And you listen to them and you go, this sounds 100% accurate. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves can even do it. And so, what is the difference between just being able to consume this leadership content and actually being able to call upon it in the moment? Because oftentimes a lot of the most consequential leadership decisions we make aren't something where it's not gonna be like, all right, what's on the calendar tomorrow? Ooh, it looks like I'm gonna have a consequential leadership decision tomorrow. It's like sometimes they just hit you, and oftentimes your reaction to it is done in the moment or without time to kind of be able to go, let me get back to this after I've had a chance to go peruse these 3 books that I've read. So how do you make it so you can actually apply these things in practice when it's needed?
I think it's just getting in the practice of actually not just reading about or thinking about leadership, but reflecting upon, had I done it that way, or when would I use this? Like, I think it's one of the reasons why we landed on the 1-minute hacks for the podcast. Was like, look, a lot of our 1-minute hacks are get out your pen and paper and write this down. And you and I both know that 90% of people listening don't pull out a pen and paper and write it down, right? Like, that's just the reality of the situation. But it makes people think. And as long as you're thinking like, okay, what would I write down? What would I say? Would that make sense? Like, as long as you're going through the motions of actually considering what the advice is, or what the theory is, or what the, podcast says, or what the YouTube video is, or the TED Talk, or whatever it is that you're taking in, as long as you're considering how that would play out or how you would utilize that, in your real life role as a leader, then I think that that's the initial step of actually applying it in action. There's been many times when I've heard a leader say something or somebody say something, and I'm like, man, that's a great point. And I go like, well, like how would that come across, or how would I use that? And I sit back and I'm like, actually, it sounded good, but it doesn't actually make any sense. And I would never do that. You know, I've had that happen. Where it's just like, wow, what a great ideal, but like that's not reality. And then there's been times when I've heard something and somebody just said something in passing. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I think about it and I'm like, oh my God, like that just shifted the way in which I think about how I support my people. So that real element of actually taking the honest time to reflect, think about it, and then like put it into play in your mind of how it plays out in real life, I believe that that's actually the first step to then be able to actually go out and do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was watching a video the other day on Jocko Willink, who does a leadership podcast. Obviously, a lot of our listeners may even listen to him. And he was talking about leadership as a learned skill, and he compared it to fighting. He compared it to like MMA or jiu-jitsu. And he said that there are actual moves you can practice to be able to become a better leader, just like there are moves you can practice when doing MMA or jiu-jitsu or something like that. And I thought it was an interesting thing because, you know, when you practice a move in fighting, typically the person you're practicing with knows it's practice, you know, and making a mistake, they go, oh, okay, all right, go ahead and try again. It's really difficult to practice a move in leadership and then be able to say if it was the wrong move, the person who you just made that wrong move with, you go, oh, hold on, that was a mistake. Let's rewind it back a little bit. Let me try that again. You don't get many opportunities like that. You know, usually you get judged on whatever that mistake was. And so, you know, the other thing I want to talk about when it comes to this is this concept of, I know I've had it happen in my own personal life too, where a mistake that I made is, I don't want to say not recoverable forever, but it damages the relationship substantially. And I'll own it. I'll own it when I do, but sometimes owning it isn't enough. And sometimes these leadership mistakes that people make, and leadership mistakes that I have made personally, are ones that they're really hard to come back from when you're talking about the relationship between you and that one person. And so it's really tough to look at it as something you can practice, because the mistakes have real consequences that are hard to move on from.
You know, as you were saying that, it made me laugh a little bit, because I'll give you a real life example. And I have a really good friend of mine who I've known for a long time and is a leader now, and in a good level of position where he's a leader of leaders. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say his initials are AA. So for anybody who knows who I'm talking about, you'll laugh because you've probably heard me tell the story. But when you talk about like the time where you get to hit the reset button, or that doesn't really happen that often, I'll never forget this. I was in an office working on something. This leader came in and said, hey, I'm going to have a conversation with somebody about something that they did the other day, and I need to hold them accountable, and I've got this write-up. And I said, okay, well, you bring them in, seek to understand, and see, do they connect the dots, and then they realize what they did. And he goes, you got it, man, no problem. So I'm sitting there, he goes away. A couple minutes later, he walks in, and the employee comes and sits down, and I swear he looks at the employee, he goes, look, you know what you did, don't do it again, sign this, right? And I said, what? I said, oh. I said, hey, you know what, can you just give us just a second? Like, I'm sorry, like, I'm just over here working on it. I just need to talk to him just for a brief second. And the employee's like, yeah, sure, okay, and he walks out. And I go, What was that? Like, we just talked about this. Like, what are you, like, you didn't do anything. And he goes, well, yeah, I was going to. And then when I told him that I needed to talk to him, he was like, I'm busy. Give me a couple of minutes. And I didn't like his attitude. So when I got him in the office, I was just over it. And so I said, you can't do that. Like, that's not how you hold people accountable. That's not the right way to do it. And I said, you need to try again. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you actually need to bring him in here and try again. And it was like one of those scenes in the movie where he opens the door and he goes, hey, he's like a different person. He's like, hey, come on in, like, have a seat, So how's your day going today? like literally it was like 10 minutes after he just did that. And the employee was just like, what is going on right now? Like, is this like good cop, bad cop? Like, I'm so confused. Like, I know I'm in trouble, but I have no idea what's going on. So then he kind of went through the steps of doing it, and it was super awkward, and I'm trying not to laugh. And the employee, they knew at the end of the day what they had done, and they knew that it was cutting a corner, and they knew they were in trouble, and they signed it. They understood. They wouldn't do it again. and then they walked out, and then we had some conversation about it. But I just share that story because it actually happened. It's so real. And I think that, to your point, like, you don't get a chance to really practice these things. And, you don't want to practice these things on real people. But as a leader, when you're trying to build skill, you really don't have much of a choice. You kind of have to apply what you've learned, whether you do it right or wrong, to actually get better at doing it over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a natural level of leeway or slack that a leader gets cut the earlier on in the role they are by even the people who they have to hold accountable. And so I'll give you an example. If a leader is really committed to doing these kind of things and they actually practice from day one, they'll make more mistakes on day one than they do on day 100, and more mistakes on day 100 than they do on day 1000. But on day 1000, if you make a mistake that is indicative of a person who's leading on day one, you don't get any slack for that because it's expected that you know this by now on day 1000. But the mistake that you make on day one, I think people cut you slack. I've been in situations where I've made mistakes as a leader and I've been cut slack by the people who were impacted by the mistake where it wasn't relationship ending, because in their mind they knew, oh, he's brand new at this. And I think that it's a natural part of the human condition to kind of cut somebody that slack, but you get less slack as time goes on. It's no different than when you take over a team and the numbers are terrible the first month. You can blame the guy who was here before you. I mean, that's an easy one, But you take over a team, if the numbers are bad 3 quarters later, you can't really blame the guy before you. That's on you now. And it's the exact same thing. You can blame a lack of experience on an actual lack of experience if you actually have it. But it's expected that the longer you're in the role, the more you find and seek out opportunities to practice these skills with people and with interactions so that you can build up these skills. Because one day you're going to find that you can't just hide in a corner and then jump out when all of a sudden you have no other option but to lead. Because if you've been in that corner for the last year, people are going to expect the tenure and the learnings and kind of the degree of a seasoned 1-year-old leader as opposed to the brand new 1-week leader in that decision-making process. And so if you make a poor decision, you're going to be held accountable to that in a much stronger way than if you just happen to be thrown something your way on your very first day. And so I think it becomes incumbent upon leaders to kind of embrace that kind of newness. It's not a get out of jail free card. It doesn't mean you can do what you want, but it does mean that if you own the mistake, if you do make a mistake and you own it right up front, you are much more likely to kind of get through it and to recover the relationship if it's early on in your leadership career. And then if you really do those things often enough, you're less likely to make those mistakes later on in your leadership career because you have practice and you've been through them before.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And I think 2 things. It's funny that you mentioned that because as you were talking, I was reflecting, and like, I've had people come up to me and say things like, I guess I'm just mad because that leader should know better. Like, I'm just like, I can't believe that that's what they said or that's what they did.
Yep.
Because like they've been that leader for so long. Like, to your point, so like people have a higher level of expectation when they know that you're tenured in role, that you shouldn't make those types of mistakes. I think the other piece of this, I think it's like ego kills grace. So like what I see with a lot of newer leaders is that their inability or their choice not to take responsibility for the mistake and to double and triple down on, no, I'm right. No, this is why I did it. Like, you don't understand, like this deflection, the defensiveness, and the ego getting bruised
100%.
Is the thing that then eliminates any grace that you get from anybody. Because again, if you're a new leader and you're sitting down with somebody and having that kind of conversation and being like, hey, like, look, we need to talk about this, but I also want to be honest with you. Like, this is the first time that I've had to have a conversation like this with somebody about either their performance or something that happened there, that type of thing. So I want you to know that, I have to go through the motions and really talk to you about what happened here. But also, this is the first time for me. So like, at the end of the day, if I'm not doing this correctly, or if you think my approach could be better, I would appreciate the feedback because I'm trying to become better as a leader. That takes a ton of humility, and I expect very few leaders to actually be comfortable enough to do that. That's one of those things where Lorenzo said it on Hacking Your Leadership, sounds great in theory. You reflect on it, you're like, man, that is crazy. I just got this job, and you want me to sit down with somebody and be like, I know I got the job, but I really don't know what I'm doing, so help me out here.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds crazy. But I will warn you, do not like stand on the hill. Do not, take that sword and just not allow yourself to admit mistakes or to own something that you did incorrectly. Because if you approach it that way, you will get no grace, whether you've been a new leader for a day or a month or for 6 months.
Yeah, and people will see through it too. But I will tell you something that for people who are listening right now who said, yeah, that sounds great in theory, and then I think later on in the moment that's going to be really difficult to do, I will tell you from personal experience, it is freeing to do. It's freeing to not have to feel like you are holding to this perfect script of what you have to do. It's freeing to say, I don't know the lines here, help me through it. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I have to do. This is what I want to maintain as far as our relationship goes, because I value you as a coworker, as a friend. I want to see us grow as in our professional relationship. I want us to walk out this door in 5 or 15 or 25 minutes with a stronger professional relationship than we had walking in here. And the only way that's going to happen is if we enter this process knowing that we each have a role to play and knowing that each of us maybe hasn't played this role before, and we're going to help each other through it. Because the company sets the guidelines of what has to happen, but how we get there is really between you and I. And if you can help me along and I can help you along, I think we'll both grow from this. There is something that is so powerful and freeing. You're telling your employee that you trust them enough to help with your own growth. You're asking them to trust you. Very few things grow professional relationships than moments like that. And moments like that can't be scheduled. They have to be taken advantage of when they arise. You can't just like, all right, I'm going to schedule this time with each of these people to build the professional relationship. When they come along, you have to jump on them.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. Get out your pen and paper, and I want you to write down the last 3 leadership mistakes you made over the last few months. Not mistakes around planning or around execution or strategy, but mistakes you made around other people's personal development or performance management. So when you've done something as a leader that you own that caused a rift between you and somebody else you're trying to lead or develop. If you can't think of those mistakes, then chances are you're not putting yourself in situations where they're possible for happening, and you're not growing yourself as a leader. So that's the first thing. But if you can think of those mistakes, an equally important part about being a leader is what you do in order to solve those mistakes or rectify them. They won't go away on their own. So think about what you can do to solve those mistakes if you haven't done it already, to fix the relationship between you and that person, and you'll continue to grow as a leader.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack. And, at the end of the day, skill building requires actually doing some things over and over and over again until you get them right. So I love the idea of focusing on mistakes that you've made and whether or not you've taken action on them to make them better, because these are great examples of times when you can actually build some skill by following up on something that's already happened to make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. And remember, the earlier on you are in your career, the more likely it is that a mistake you make is not going to be career ending. The later on in your career you are, the more likely it is to be career ending, or at least very career stalling. And so really take advantage of these opportunities as you become a leader, as you take on new teams, when you have that grace, as Lorenzo put it, from your team, and make sure you're kind of owning that time and using it to grow.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode